Okay, good evening, everyone. I think we're ready to begin. I hope you all enjoyed our presentation while you were waiting for us, but we are ready to begin. This is the PuLSE Institute's Global Forum on Women in Poverty. My name is Tina Patterson. I am the president of the Institute. I will be welcoming you in today, and then I will introduce our moderator, who will then begin our program and introduce all of the speakers we have lined up for you today. So thank you for your participation and your interest and your energy in this evening. In the midst of an ever-changing body politic in this nation and in turn in the world, it's imperative that we continue to embrace our authenticity and uniqueness that each individual possesses and brings to expand the table of equity, an impossible feat without diversity. On the heels of Black History Month, we move into Women's History Month now here in March 2021. And we continue to honor our predecessors who fought for our inclusion in society and in this ever expanding global community today. That is what brings us here this evening, and the fact that we know we still have so much work to do to achieve full equity and basic human respect and dignity, especially for Black people, for other people of color, and for women, which is why we're here today. Too long we've been marginalized by exclusionary and institutional practices. However, tonight we are here to say loud and clear that these practices are bad policy and a better world must be created with new ideas, bold ideas, and chief among these necessary voices long excluded, like those of women. We must be at the forefront of change, and our leadership must be asserted to achieve these lofty and completely possible goals. This can be done and accomplished with the help of committed allies, particularly men, who can help bring in our voices and elevate our leadership in confines they inhabit that have shut the door on us for too long. Tonight, you will hear from a true diversity of voices, both men and women, of different ages, races, faiths, and other backgrounds, all of whom are connected to our shared ideal of equity and humanity. As the president of this institute, I am thankful for their presence here this evening, and I'm honored to bring this enriching treasure trove of human experience to each of you. Thank you again for being here tonight. I hope you walk away inspired, more learned, and empowered to act immediately in whatever way you can in your respective communities to be and to bring about the change we wish to see in the world. With this, I will now hand the program over to the skillful and trustworthy hands of our moderator and master of ceremonies for tonight, Detroit News columnist and our editor-in-chief here at the PuLSE Institute, Mr. Bankole Thompson.
All right. Thank you so much, Attorney Tina Patterson, for those very touching remarks about the theme here this evening, Global Forum on Women Leadership in Fighting Poverty. I'm honored to be the moderator here this evening. We have quite a lineup, as Attorney Patterson indicated, a diverse lineup. But let me begin by establishing some universal truths here before I bring in the one and only compelling Sister Simone Campbell to give us the invocation. Let me establish these universal truths. The United States, in its 200-year republic, just elected its first female vice president, Kamala Harris, who was the first Black woman to become the second in command of the world's leading superpower. Even though Kamala Harris's ascendance to the vice presidency is an important chapter in the quest for gender leadership, her elevation comes at a time when women hold significant less leadership roles, make less money than men, and live in poverty at higher rates than men. History has proven that with resources and leadership standing, women improve their lot in life as well as empower other women to do the same for themselves and their communities. From Kenya's Nobel laureate Wangari Maathai, the barbarian American Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, Albania's Mother Teresa, Pakistan's former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, to the prominent African-American attorney and voting rights activist Stacey Abrams, women have demonstrated that when empowered with leadership, they utilize it to effect change among marginalized populations. It is out of this universal truth that the PuLSE Institute is convening this forum, which we believe is a foundational investment in driving the demand for more women in leadership positions, which will nurture and create a more just and equitable society, because we believe that investing in women leadership is an investment into a justice-oriented future of the 21st century. Today, we'll have a special keynote video address from Dr. Natalia Kanem, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund. But as we make our way through the program this evening, again, I want to thank all of you for being here. We see more and more folks are coming in. The next on the list, she's no stranger to this nation. When the PuLSE Institute was founded, she was one of the first people that told us it was an honor to be affiliated with this institute. She was one of the first people who readily embraced the vision and saw it for what it is. Despite the fact that she may disagree with my phraseology here, despite the fact that she sits on top of a mountain, Sister Simone Campbell is one of the most humble of voices you will find in this land. She loves people. She loves justice. She has been a voice for economic justice, immigration reform. She has been an ally of Pope Francis's anti-poverty message. She has done a lot across this nation. Some of us know her from the nuns on the bus, the tax justice. You know, she has been a thorn in the flesh of those double-talking politicians in Washington, D.C. When they hear that Sister Simone is coming, they have to get themselves together. Maybe they have to read some passage in the Bible before she shows up. But she is a remarkable voice for justice in this nation. And we are fortunate that she's one of the living voices in this era that is providing not only a compelling political message, but a compelling moral message. And we are honored that she is on the National Advisory Panel of the PuLSE Institute. We've been looking to bring in her to Detroit, but unfortunately COVID hit. So we're still hoping that when this virus dissipates, we can get her to Detroit. She most recently gave the opening invocation at the 2020 Democratic National Convention, where President Joe Biden received the nomination. She previously was one of the keynote speakers at the 2012 Democratic National Convention, where President Barack Obama received the nomination for a second term. She's the executive director of Network, which is the leading Catholic social justice lobby in Washington, D.C., and an important voice for this era and this moment. Sister Simone Campbell will give us the invocation.
Oh, thank you so much. You do humble me. Thank you. I'm blushing here. Don't know if you can tell it on this small Zoom screen, but it's true indeed. Thank you so much, Bankole. It's such an honor to be here at the beginning of Women's History Month and to honor the work and the passion of women all over the world. I remember when I was a young college student taking a foreign policy class, and I learned in my studies that women are the key to economic development all over the world because women help their families flourish. Women are social actors who help in navigating social unrest, social policy, but also in ensuring that the community comes together. I think part of that reason, at least in my community, is because we always bring food, which is an essential element that we don't have that experience of in Zoomland, but consider it here. Women also are the first educators of their children. Women are the first healthcare providers, the entrepreneurs, the family economists. Women are the mainstays of development for their community and for their families. We know this, and so many of us on this Zoom have lived it. And I know that women embody the divine spirit that brings all of life. And so I invite you to join me in prayer, and however your prayer form might be, but I offer you mine as a way forward. And in our tradition, the Spirit, often called the Holy Spirit, is often identified as the feminine image of God. And so, in this illustrious gathering, I invite you to join me in a prayer to the Divine Spirit, to She, who is the power. O Spirit, it is recounted in the very first line of the Hebrew scriptures that form the bedrock of the Abrahamic traditions, that you breathed over the waters of chaos and brought forth a new creation. Breathe over us today, O Spirit, that we might be instruments of creating a new world, a new way, where none of our children live in poverty and all of our families flourish. O Divine Spirit, in the Christian scriptures, it is recounted that you came on the men and women in the upper room who had been so frightened, aloof, and alone. Pour on us today in this time of COVID-separated pandemic reality. Pour on us the fire of your love, that we might be enlivened at the end of this time together, to go out from this place and spread the news of women's critical role in ending poverty in the 21st century. O Divine Spirit, breathe into us your creativity and your confidence, that we might take the energy and insight that we gain in our time together today and use it as sustenance for the critical work ahead. We trust in your continuing presence to sustain us in all of the struggle, because, O Divine Spirit, you are the source of life for all. And trusting in your presence, trusting in your promise, trusting in your energy, in the name of all that is holy, let all of the people say, Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you so much, Sister Simone Campbell, for that remarkable invocation here. And I think we're good to go now. We have folks lined up. We have multiple speakers here who are going to be sharing stories, women sharing their stories in terms of just the ability to transcend barriers and be a force for good. We're going to hear later on from Janice Carney. She's a former first, of course, in history, the first presidential diarist, and was a W.B. Du Bois Fellow at Harvard University. She's a proud daughter of the American South. She'll let you know that. We'll also hear later on from Cindy Paske, who's a business leader here in Detroit and in Michigan, and one of the few, and I say this without equivocation, Sister Simone, she's one of the few CEOs who does not walk away when you mention the word poverty in this region. So as when sometimes when you engage in your devotion, Sister Simone, we need some more prayers for these CEOs in this region. But let me move on to our welcome remarks here. He also was one of the first to embrace the PuLSE Institute. And when he and I exchanged text message, he said, I'll be honored. I said, no, we are honored because you are a Gandhi. I said, we are honored that you want to be affiliated with the PuLSE Institute and has been a quiet but a strong supporter of the Institute itself. And despite all that he has on his plate, when 2 years ago we were recognizing International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, he wrote a column for the PuLSE Institute. And to us, that was just more than just a gesture. And in the same Sister Simone fashion, whatever we requested, Dr. Arun Gandhi is there. He's not only a member of the PuLSE Institute, he is, in fact, the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. He's an international advocate for nonviolence and anti-poverty and an anti-poverty champion. He's a member of the board of directors of the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital in South Africa and the Parliament of the World Religions. He's a founder and former director of the MK Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence and the founding president of the Gandhi Worldwide Education Institute. Dr. Gandhi is one who is following in the footsteps, and in fact, he is the caretaker, if I can put it that way, of the Mahatma Gandhi legacy. And we are honored that he's not only affiliated with the Institute, but has been supporting us in the many ways that he can, and has agreed to give us the welcome remarks here. I think it is only fit and meet and right that in recognizing women, Global Forum on Women Poverty, Women Forum in Fighting Poverty, that we get a message from Dr. Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi.
Thank you very much, Bankole. It's been a wonderful experience working with you and being part of the PuLSE Institute. As a member of the advisory board, I'm very honored to welcome all of you to this wonderful gathering where we are going to discuss some very important issues. I think it's important that we have a proper perspective of what we are talking about and what we want to achieve. I know women have had to bear the brunt of poverty in every country in the world, even more than the children and the men who are living in poverty. For 30 years, while I was living in India, I got involved in working for the poor and the destitute and the oppressed. And I saw poverty very closely and experienced it, and it shocked me how the women were, the most oppressed among the poor people. The children, when they were hungry, went to the mother for food. The husbands who went out to work and instead of bringing the money home, they would pretend to drown their miseries in alcohol and waste the money there, and they would come home drunk and want food, and the women didn't have any food and they would be beaten up. So they really were at the lowest rung and had to suffer a lot, and we had to do a lot to change the entire culture of this group to enable them to get back into mainstream society. The thing that I remember very clearly are the words of my grandfather when he said that whenever we do any kind of work for the oppressed and the destitute, it is important for us to ensure that whatever we do for them helps to rebuild their self-respect and self-confidence, and not make them dependent on charity or on somebody's help all the time. And I think that is a very important thing for us to remember, because we, in our enthusiasm to do good for people and for society, we keep giving things to people without our understanding of what is that doing to the people. Is it helping them? Is it building them up? Is it enabling them to stand on their own feet? Or are we making them dependent on charity or aid forever? And if we work with that intention of rebuilding their self-confidence and self-respect, I think it goes a long way. I would like to share with you one little story. When my wife and I went to this village in India to speak with them about their poverty and learn from them the problems that they had. We were entertained by the men of the village under a tree. We gathered there and we were talking, but no women came out of the huts. And my wife was very disturbed by this, and she asked the men, she said, why aren't the women not out here to participate in this discussion? And they said, well, it's difficult. We would suggest that you go into the hut and see them there, and you will learn why they cannot come out. So my wife went into the huts there, and she saw this congregation of women who were sitting quietly inside in the darkened room, partly because they didn't have enough clothes to wear. They couldn't come out in public because they didn't have enough clothes to wear. When they had to go out, they wore each other's clothes and went out. They shared each other's clothes. That was the level of poverty that existed in that village. And these same women had to walk for 3 miles one way to carry a bucket of water from the nearest water resource and bring it home for their daily use. Now, all of this put a tremendous amount of strain on the women. And, it was just a matter of finding water for them. So we, when we went back to the city, we found a company that specialized in boreholes to search for water. And they found that there was water very close to their village, underground water. And if we bore a hole there, we would be getting a good supply of water for almost forever. And so we found 10,000 rupees, and we made this hole there and a well, and the complexion of that village changed completely. We built that water supply. They had time because they didn't have to go walk long distances to get a bucket of water. They could do agriculture and get some fresh food for them. And so they were able to build on that and change their lives. And today that village has become a wonderful, thriving village where their economy changed. They were able to, are able to send their children to schools and so on. So just the fact that we got this money to drill a well for them in their village and provided them with the basic necessity of water changed the complexion of that village. So that is what I think my grandfather wanted, that we enable them to find their own means and stand on their own feet by giving them a helping hand instead of, keep giving them aid. So these are aspects of poverty that we need to consider and talk about and discuss. I do realize that poverty in every country is at different level, different understanding of poverty. What is considered to be poverty in this country, in many other countries, it's considered to be relative affluence. That is the level of poverty in many African countries and and the Asian countries. And they don't get any assistance from the governments, but they have to deal with it themselves. So I hope that these discussions will lead to something concrete and constructive, and we'll be able to achieve good results from there. And so I'm again extending my warm welcome to all of you to participate in this free and frank discussion and come to some conclusion, because it's important that all of us enjoy a good standard of living, and you know, not have to live in distress. So with these words, I thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I'm sorry I won't be able to stay with you throughout the discussion, but I have another Zoom meeting at 6 o'clock, and I need to prepare for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Arun Gandhi. We are quite and indeed very honored that you made yourself available for this evening's forum. Thanks again. We are honored by your presence and participation as well. Yes, I'm. You know, everybody these days you talk to tells you, you know, they're zooming my head off. You know, people are in and out of Zooms 24/7. So this is the new life that we've become accustomed to.
Yes.
Yes, indeed, indeed. All right, we'll move on now to folks. We have a segment coming on called Sharing Stories, and you'll hear from two women from two different backgrounds who are going to share compelling stories of things that they've been able to do, and at the forefront of this conversation, of this kind of discourse regarding global forum on women leadership in fighting poverty. We're coming shortly to them, but I want to go to the board, the chair of the board of the PuLSE Institute, the Reverend C. Pascal Eze. We have two ministers here this evening. He is a leadership mentor, author, editor of many books. He's the vice president and head of spiritual life at the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, which is one of the oldest rescue mission ministries in the nation, devoted to helping homeless veterans and other marginalized populations. He's a multi-award-winning stakeholder relations trainer, crisis communication expert, and serves in many community benefiting capacities, including on the recipient rights advisory board of Michigan's largest regional behavioral network, which is the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, which serves over 75,000 children and adult recipients. He is, in fact, a strong anti-poverty advocate and one who has, you know, committed himself to this work, and we are honored to have him as the board chair of the PuLSE Institute. He's going to give us a few remarks and a statement of purpose, and then we'll descend to the segment, the conversation here with Janice Carney and Cindy Paske, and I'll introduce them when we get there as we make our way to the special video keynote from Dr. Natalia Kanem, United Nations Under Secretary General. Reverend
Thank you so much, Bankole. I feel honored by that introduction. I remember you and I were talking like 2 days ago, and you stressed the importance of men being engaged in the campaign for gender equality. And I'm so enamored by the fact that I'm not the only man here. Arun Gandhi just spoke, and I can see Chairman Riley is there. That's a wonderful thing. At the end of the day, we have to try to get more men involved in this process. A few days ago, I posted on my Facebook page a story of an 81-year-old man. He's going to be 82 next month, and he wakes up at 4 a.m. To get ready for work. He goes to bed at clockwork at 8 p.m. And I asked him, you know, what's the secret of his vibrance, his energy at 81? He says he's told me he was enjoying the guidance and the prayer of his grandma. And many of us are where we are because we have grandmas and moms and mother figures that provided the guidance and the support and of course the prayers that we needed to get to where we are today. In In 2017, Swanee Hunt, former US ambassador to Austria, published a book, authored a book that was published by Duke University Press, titled Rwandan Women Rising. Swanee later on founded the Women and Policy, Public Policy program at Harvard. But this book is very interesting, and former President Jimmy Carter wrote the foreword to the book. And I want to read from it because I think it is relevant to what we're doing here today. He said in his, President Jimmy Carter in his foreword to the book, Rwandan Women Rising, he said, Rwanda has become the standard bearer in female political representation. 64% of the seats in parliament, not to mention half the cabinet and half the Supreme Court. That's progress, right? I think it's progress. If we move from Rwanda to Estonia, Estonia in Eastern Europe, last January, the elected president and the elected prime minister became women, both of them women. That's progress, right? A lot of progress. We move to WTO, World Trade Organization, where Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who used to be managing director of World Bank, has just emerged March 1st as the director general. She's from Nigeria. Great progress, right? I agree. But if you go to the UNDP Human Development Index, it tells a different story. Rwanda is ranked 160. Now, it is number one in terms of parliamentary participation by women, but in terms of life expectancy and all those things that come together to form the basis for our evaluation of the quality of life, Rwanda is way, way, way low. Nigeria, where Dr. Okonjo-Iweala comes from, is 161. Estonia, 29. Very good, right? Now, but Norway is number one. Ireland and Switzerland, number two. Hong Kong, number four. My question then is, and I think we should explore this, this question in the course of our conversations, what is Norway doing that Rwanda is not doing? Why the dichotomy? Is increased political participation tantamount, does it always reflect in improved standard of living for all women in the population? Rwanda tells us it doesn't. The same thing in Nigeria. How do we draw the correlation between political participation and economic participation in a way that reflects in improved standard of living for women in the population? That, my fellow participants, is a question that I think we should explore. I am so glad that we are here and enthused at the opportunity to dig into this subject matter. And I believe that at the end of the conversation, there will be answers and not just questions. Thank you so much.
You've given us quite a food for thought. The Reverend Pascal Eze, the dichotomy and the conflicts that are wrapped in there in terms of the confluence of women rising and the gap between what Dr. King calls it, the gap between the promises made and promises unfulfilled. I think there's a lot in there for us to explore here. Thanks again for your remarks, and I think they're well within the context of this conversation this evening. I didn't know about Estonia, so that's news to me. I'll be looking more into that. Just the way you were able to weave that, and this is quite a global engagement on women leadership here. We want to move on to this segment. We down the line, we're going to have a fireside chat right after the special keynote address between Attorney Tina Patterson and Karen Weaver, the former mayor of Flint. Flint went on the global map with the water crisis, the water shutoffs, the lead water in Flint. Flint was propelled to international attention when we discovered in 2015 that folks in there were drinking, children as young as 4 years old were drinking lead water. The mayor, who was a woman, Karen Weaver, who presided during those tumultuous years in Flint, would be engaged in a fireside chat with Attorney Tina Patterson later on in the program. But right now, we're going to talk about women in leadership roles sharing their stories. And I want to begin with Janice Carney. She's a journalist extraordinaire, a publisher of the historic Arkansas State Press. She later served as presidential diarist, the first in history and the first African-American to former President Bill Clinton. After leaving Washington, D.C., she wrote books and founded a publishing company. She served as a 2-year fellow at the Harvard University's W.B. Du Bois Research Institute. And she is an outspoken advocate on the issues of the marginalized, issues that are affecting those who are at the lowest rung of the economic ladder. And she always will let you know that she is a proud daughter of the American South. A terminology that I believe is pregnant with so many meanings, because when we talk about the American South, we talk about poverty, we talk about Jim Crow, we talk about slavery. There's so much. It's almost I can, you can there's so much that comes with that description. But Janice Carney is also a member of our National Advisory Panel and one of the first allies to embrace this vision of what the PuLSE Institute is doing. Let's go straight to Janice Carney. She's going to talk to us, and you'll hear, she's going to share her story. You will hear from her in terms of the how she rose to where she is today. Janice Carney, your turn.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Bankole, again for inviting me to be a part of this program, and I am already enjoying it. I've already got food for thought that I'll be discussing with others, but I am happy to be here. Always, you bring such amazing conversation about the community and families and poverty and how it disproportionately affects women and children and people of color. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm not going to speak very long because I am looking forward to hearing Dr. Kanem speak. So I'll be very brief. I'm not a person who gets upset very much, but poverty upsets me. And some of the data that I've seen lately, I'm sure the rest of you have seen it, just the fact that over this last year and a half during the COVID epidemic, how much poorer women and children and families of color are than they were before. It's really heart-rending. One of the reports that I read said that the end of 2020 brought the sharpest rise in the US poverty rate since the 1960s, increasing by 2.4% during the latter half of 2020. And that was mostly due to COVID. And that's nearly double the largest annual increase in poverty since the 1960s. And of course, we know that when this happens, that Blacks and people of color are more disproportionately impacted by this. But what really gets in my craw is the fact that also during this time, we have more billionaires than we've ever had before. The combined net worth of the 2020 class of the 400 richest Americans was $3.2 trillion. Up from 2.7 trillion in 2017. And as of October 2020, there were 614 billionaires. So we see not only are the rich getting unbelievably richer, but the poor are increasingly getting poorer. And the numbers of poor is really growing. So my question is, with this kind of riches, why do we see such overwhelming poverty in a country with so much opportunity, with so much waste, actually? And I think questions like this, we have to have events and panels and forums to really get to the bottom, the foundation of why we are not moving forward as a people. So I implore each of you to consider some of the last words of the late Congressman Lewis, who told us, when we see something, say something. More than ever, we need his passion for righting the wrongs of this world, beginning with these shameful, just shameful economic inequities. When I talk about poverty, I understand that all demographics experience poverty, but I truly believe that if we could fix the abysmal problems of poverty when it comes to women and children, we'd be a lot closer to fixing the problem of global poverty. The one denominator for children who fail in school, who fail to dream, who live each day with low self-expectations and low expectations from parents and teachers is poverty. What we all know is that our children can learn, and that ignorance has nothing to do with the color of a child's skin or the street they live on. Poverty has everything to do with it. Poverty kills. It kills dreams. It kills futures. It kills opportunities. It kills the will to try. Bankole, you know my story of a family that grew up in the Deep South, 19 children with 2 parents on a little farm, which my dad rented because we were sharecroppers. And if you know anything about the history of the South, sharecroppers was just one step from slavery. And in many, many ways, it may have been worse than slavery. But we lived in Southeast Arkansas, where being Black and being poor were not only accepted, but expected by most people, but certainly by whites. But it wasn't by my parents. Though they went to bed and woke up each day as poor as they were the day before, they refused to accept that poverty would dictate their children's future. They empowered us with dreams and hopes and expectations, and probably the most important of all, a love for learning. They knew, though neither one of them graduated from high school, they knew that education was the key out of poverty. And they planted that seed deep within each of us, so deep that 18 of their 19 children went on to graduate from colleges. And most of us have been able to achieve the dreams that began long ago down in Southeast Arkansas. So when I tell people that, I know that that's not everybody's story. I know that everyone isn't able to do that. My parents, I believe God embedded something inside of them because they knew that was the only way their children would survive. There were so many of us and we were so poor, but thank God that he did. But everyone deserves a positive outcome, no matter where they start out. We must not accept other people's determination of who we are based on our poverty or what we weren't born with, or what an unjust system refuses us. So let's continue. I know I think everybody on this call probably, we do our part to fight City Hall when City Hall is wrong, to go to county governments and tell them when they're wrong, to go to the governor's offices, the Congress office, the White House. But what we must also continue to do is to tell our children, because our children are our future. We have to tell them, no matter where they live, whether it's rural or inner city, it doesn't matter, that they are worthy and that their worth has nothing to do with what they have or what others have. Remember, poverty is an insidious cancer, and if we allow it, it will take over not only our children's bodies, but their minds and their spirits. And as mothers, as aunties, as grandmas, we have a responsibility to protect them and prepare them. So as I close, I'd just like to say that What is saddest about this conversation is that it is an old conversation, and we've done this conversation so many times. There's nothing new about the misery of the poor. And even as hopeful as the summer of 2020 was, I think we were all hopeful when men and women and children around the world took up their mantle and marched against social and economic injustice. The sad truth is that we have been down this road before, but we can't stop. We can't give up hope. We have to remember, as Martin Luther King said, the arc is long. And it will take us taking on the fight for the long run as our children continue to go hungry and mothers are yet unable to take care of those children. And the justice system continues to deal with both children and mothers unjustly. The great writer, Arundhati Roy said, "There's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard." Let us commit to helping our children, our mothers, our women, and the poor find their voices, raise their voices, and speak out for their right to happiness. Until we do, history repeats itself. The gap between the rich and the poor grows wider each and every day. I don't think any of us came here with answers. You guys have some great questions though, and we won't leave here with all the answers, but let's all find a way, even if it's a small way, to raise our voices and help raise the voices of others. With all our historic problems, our strength remains in our community, in our people, in voices like yours. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Janice Carney, former presidential diarist, author extraordinaire, a daughter of the American South. Folks, several years ago, Bryan Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and the architect of the Jim Crow Museum in the South, went to Silicon Valley. And he pricked the conscience of Silicon Valley, and he was talking to a room full of CEOs. And he was telling them, beckoning and beseeching them about the role that they can play. Because Bryan Stevenson has come to the conclusion, like a lot of us, that we cannot fight this fight alone, and that we must, in fact, while we are raising Cain and hell in the streets of justice, in the parking lots, with the placards, writers are writing, speaking truth to power. Bryan Stevenson finds out that you need to be able to get in that CEO room in the C-suite and be able to talk to individuals who are there, business leaders, if you will. When the PuLSE Institute was founded, one of the things that we've made as a priority, we launched a conversation series called the PuLSE Forum, the CEO Forum on Poverty series. Is the first of its kind in this region. Now, mind you, Southeast Michigan, if you're not from this area, we have all kinds of forums. I mean, there's a forum for everything. And permit me to say, there might even be a forum if you sneeze, there's a forum for sneezing. So we got all kinds of forums, all kinds of events and so forth. But in the years that I've covered this area for more than 2 decades, I have not seen a forum of the high caliber that the PuLSE has convened in this region, which is an ongoing series, of major industry captains, CEOs of major businesses, presidents of major universities, on a panel for an entire 2 hours talking about poverty. And the PuLSE Institute has been the only one that has been able to do that when we launched this CEO Forum on Poverty series 2 years ago. And it has become not only a resounding success, but a go-to space to look. If you have a searchlight, you're looking, for, let me look for some, some conscious, if you will, some conscientious CEOs. I mean, if you come to the PuLSE Forum, you will find that it's not everyone who has the title of a CEO, an industry captain, may think that the world begins and ends on Wall Street. And so those forums have been very, very successful. Cindy Paske has graced that forum numerous times. She's a member of the PuLSE, what we call the Business Leaders Against Poverty Initiative, which is a working group. She's the president and CEO of Strategic Staffing Solutions. It's a company she founded in 1990. She has an incredible story as a woman, how she founded her own company. And she's on the board of Business Leaders for Michigan, which is the state of Michigan's top CEO group. She's an inductee into the Michigan Hall of Fame and was recently named among the top 100 most influential Lithuanian women. The thing that is unique about Cindy is she's very deliberate about what she wants to say. And she's very strong on the question of poverty. When we had one of the forums, she said what we need is benchmarks, because I have covered this region, this area, and we have seen how people have doled money out. You know, we've seen what we call helicopter gestures. That's what I call them. You know, when foundations announce that, you know, they found a rabbit in their hat, so they're going to give out a check. You know, helicopter gestures. And when you see all those presentations, you look at where Detroit is, you say, well, okay, wait a minute, 10 years ago, you all did this. What has happened? Because there's been no benchmark. And Cindy has been very deliberate in calling for a benchmark in terms of how we address the poverty question. And since this is the global forum on women leadership in fighting poverty, she has been one of the rare few, and I'll repeat this, I normally don't do it, but I'll repeat it, one of the rare few in the CEO suite in Michigan who would not walk away when you mention the word poverty and understands why this fight is important and why we're doing what we're doing. So you'll hear from her. Let me go straight to Cindy Paske, President and CEO of the Strategic Staffing Solutions.
Well, thank you, Bankole, and thank you, Tina. Thank you for your leadership. I think, Tina, I think you're fearless, knowing where you are and how you've advanced your career, and you always think about advancing others. So thank you for your leadership, and of course, Bankole, thank you for your consistent and determined voice. And I'm really humbled to be here with the other individuals. And I'm not going to talk about my story, though it didn't start with much at all. It actually started in a pretty challenging place. Sadly, a lot of people assume that's not the case now, because us3's been around for a while, but it is. I will note that I just got back from Lithuania, where all three of the leadership positions, including the prime minister, that were elected a couple of months ago, are women, who all managed from 3 different parties to form a coalition and to have a government that is working incredibly well. And the majority of the ministers are now women. So kudos to the those Eastern Europeans. And then I'll share one story at the end about the trip that I made. So thank you again. I'm going to share some stats real quick. I'm not going to talk very long, but I want to run through these stats because these are the stats that a lot of CEOs like to share. A lot of elected officials from both parties, any party, like to share. And you know, when you hear them, they sound really good. But you need to think about what's behind them. So recent statistics on women in leadership: 29% of senior management in 2019 is female. 33 female CEOs lead Fortune 500 companies. That's General Motors, IBM, Anthem, Lockheed Martin, Best Buy, and Duke Energy, to highlight a few. 87% of global businesses have at least one woman in a management position. Note, they said at least one. They didn't say at least 2. 12.5% of American women are employed as chief financial officers. That's a really important number. That's a number that we want to see increase. 77.9% are employed as human resource managers. And a lot of people like to roll these stats out. And, you know, in my opinion, they're not good stats. They're not setting the world on fire. They're not positioning women in leadership to drive change. Here's the stats that the business community traditionally doesn't like to share. According to the U.S. Census Bureau data, of the 38.1 million people living in poverty in 2018, 56%, or 21.4 million, were women. right? So think about that percentage, 56%. Compare that to a stat where we're supposed to be celebrating at least one is in leadership. Think about that. In 2018, 12.9% of women lived in poverty compared with 10.6% of men. Nearly 10 million women lived in deep poverty, which is defined as falling below 50% of the federal poverty line. Women of nearly all races and backgrounds face higher rates of poverty than their male counterparts. The highest rates of poverty, and we all know this, are experienced by American Indian women, African American women, and Latinas. While Latino women represent 18.1% of all women in the US population, they constitute 27.1% of women in poverty. African American women represent 22.3% of women in poverty, but make up only 12.8% of all women in the US population. Unmarried mothers have higher rates of poverty than married women with or without children, and unmarried women without children. Almost 25% of our unmarried mothers live below the poverty line. So when you listen to CEOs and you listen to leadership, and to Bankole's point, I'm always pushing for us to have a baseline. How do we actually measure the dollars that we talk about, and how do we know they really drive sustainable change, not short-term change? How do they give people an opportunity to stabilize themselves and then to figure out how to change their station in life? And I share those numbers. Many of you know those, or you would have been close to them without having me have to read them. But in my mind, if you want leadership in the business community at the CEO level to really drive change, they need to know these numbers, and their team needs to know these numbers. And the only way that happens is when we say them over and over and over. And I say them over and over and over. And you call the question. Just pick one of the stats, right? Just pick one stat and ask them. Get them to start thinking of it in terms of numbers. If they can't all see souls, then get them to see numbers, right? Because they're going to respond to that. So how do we change this? Well, we have to start with understanding it, right? And you can look at it from my point of view, which is when you walk in a room, you see souls first before you see anybody else. And that was taught to me, my grandparents who came to Lithuania in 1911 with nothing but one suitcase and didn't speak English. And their whole view on the world was, you see souls first, and that's how you want to be seen, and everything else will work its way through. But the other way that you do that is you be prepared to roll out those stats, and be prepared to roll them out in a business conversation laid next to the stats that people like to present about the world of business. Just pick one or two and compare them. And start the dialogue that way, because it changes the thought process. From a very tactical standpoint, and both Tina and Bankole know, I've got, this is your conversation over here, and then there has to be some tactical things that you can do every single day while you're trying to drive the larger conversation and have attention for it. You can actually really mentor a woman. You can provide your experience and guidance to a woman who's finding her way in the business community, of all levels, all types of business. You can sponsor a woman. Now there's a difference. I think mentor is one of the most overused words out there. Everybody's going to mentor somebody. They're going to this, they're going to that. Mentoring someone is providing them information, pointing them to where they could get training, perhaps facilitating that training. When you sponsor a woman, in my world, my definition of sponsoring a woman is you lend your name and your reputation to that individual in order to shortcut the time it takes for them to advance forward. So when you talk to people and individuals in your communities anywhere in the world, at any level, Start having the conversation about the difference between someone signing themselves or their teams or their staff or their churches or their neighborhood organizations to mentor, to who's actually going to sponsor someone, who's going to lend their name to someone to shortcut the process it takes for them to advance their agenda. It's a difference maker, and it's very rarely spoken about. And then at S3, those of you who know us, I mean, I'm the CEO of a company that's close to $500 million, and I'm sitting here with my green hair. So obviously we do things a little bit different. But when you think about what CEOs do, most of them have their leadership team read books about profit margins, about how to be better at business, how to be a better salesperson, how to understand the market, how to brand. The last book that I had every single member of my leadership team read was $2 a Day, Living on Almost Nothing in America. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. And the idea behind that was for them to ensure they had a lens into the world that wasn't theirs right now. For some of them, it had been theirs in the past. And we actually, in October, Bankole, when everybody came in and we all did our, team COVID test together to celebrate S3 being 30 years old, we did a roundtable with my entire leadership team, and some individuals shared the story of how they were at that point in time with their colleagues. Normally, they wouldn't have felt like they could do that, or there wouldn't have been a forum, but everyone had read this book. That was their assignment before they came in. We talked about all the other things you would think we talked about in business, but the most meaningful conversation was when we talked about that book and people shared stories. And the point I made to the S3 team and to the leadership team is, when we do our job and we do it really well, and we're successful in servicing our customers and successful in growing the company and being financially strong, it gives us the resources and the tools to help make a difference in the community, to offer people an opportunity to change their station in life, and to have the street creds in the business world to have these conversations. Because we're really good at what we do, and we're really successful as a company. So when we want to bring this conversation to the table, it's not as easy to dismiss us, because we're a powerhouse in the business world. And everyone knows that. So how do we do things differently? The leadership team that averages 13 years in the industry, their reading assignment was $2 a Day, Living on Almost Nothing in America. And as I mentioned before, we make a point at looking at souls before we look at faces. We look at talent before we look at resumes. We look at work ethic before we look at qualifications. And we have the best team, not just in our industry, but I think one of the best teams, period. Shows by our numbers, right? Shows by the results we drive, shows by the jobs that we create and the impact we have in our community. And we look a little different, and it's not just my green hair. Our leadership team is 50% women, 35% are from diverse backgrounds. 57% of the consultants that we have around the world are employees that are identified as non-white, 57%. 58% of our team are veterans. And we're one of the most successful companies in our industry, in Detroit, in Michigan, and successful, period. So it can be done, and it should be done. And my forum for being able to drive this agenda is I use the success of S3 to make sure I have a place at the table that is harder for me to be dismissed, to have this conversation. And Bankole, I continuously have this conversation. And then I will close with, when I was in Lithuania, I had an opportunity to meet with Svetlana. And I don't know if anyone at this table has followed what's going on in Belarus, but there were false elections. A crony of Putin's was not going to win the election. Her husband was. He was arrested. He was put in jail. Everyone working with him was put in jail, and she ran, and she won. She had to flee the country for her life with her children. And she is in her 40s. She is a woman. She was a teacher. She is a mother, and she is fighting for the independence of a country that's key to the independence of that part of the world and key to standing up to the beast in the east, which is Russia. So when you think about, do women really drive change? Do they really have impact? She is working for, as she said to me, dignity first and then democracy for an entire country, with the good chance that she will never see her husband alive again. That's leadership. That's the difference that women have made, are making, and will making. Our job is to find ways to advance that agenda and to use the word sponsorship more than we use mentorship. And with that, I'll end. Thank you, Bankole, and thank you, Tina.
Thank you so much, Cindy Paske, President and CEO of the Strategic Staffing Solutions. Cindy put quite a lot in there, the global dimensions from Lithuania to Detroit, and some of the things that you highlighted, things that I think we have discussed in public policy forums, and that is, how do we shift the pendulum here, looking at souls, not just numbers. And in fact, Cindy wrote a column about 2 years ago for the PuLSE about why it should not only be about the bottom line, but we should look at human beings and the individual themselves. So that was quite a presentation. Thanks again for that presentation, folks. We have a dueling exchange coming up between Attorney Tina Patterson and the former mayor of Flint, Karen Weaver. Again, this is part of recognizing Women's History Month, having conversation. This has been so enriching for me. I've learned a lot. I'm a columnist, so my brain is always walking about, just different ideas. So, I mean, it's like being sitting in a classroom, listening to Cindy Paske, Janice Carney, listening to what Sister Simone said earlier. Dr. Arun Gandhi. Has been beautiful here. Our special keynote video address, Dr. Natalia Kanem, she was scheduled to be here, but if you're running, if you're a top level, one of the top cabinet members for United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we understand how that schedule can be. She had already agreed to be here to deliver the keynote address, and this is something that her office and we've been talking back and forth in email and everything. But something came up with COVID in terms of what is happening with COVID. And as we all know, we're following the news, the UN, and there are lots of nations that are still not accessing the vaccines that we have here. So her schedule changed, but she insisted, she will still deliver this keynote. And what she did is taped a remarkable keynote address from the UN headquarters in New York that we are going to listen to. There's so much in there. I'm not gonna let it all out the bag. I didn't listen to the entire thing, so I just gave it to a tech guy to get it all set for you. But let me do the proper introduction here. Dr. Natalia Kanem, appointed by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2017, has more than 3 decades of strategic leadership experience in the fields of preventive medicine. She's a doctor, public and reproductive health, social justice, and philanthropy. She holds a medical degree from Columbia University in New York and a master's degree in public health with specializations in epidemiology and preventive medicine from the University of Washington in Seattle. She's a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College in History and Science. As a leader of UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, we call it the United Nations Population Fund, Dr. Kanem is recognized for her powerful advocacy for the rights and choices of women and girls, and as a key influencer and thought leader in the formulation of global policy on sexual and reproductive health and rights in the Sustainable Development Goals era, and has been listed on the Gender Equality Top 100. She's a member of the United Nations Senior Management Group, a high-level body chaired by the Secretary General, a member of the United Nations System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, the United Nations Secretariat Management Performance Board, and the H6 Partnership for Global Health, and the UN AIDS Committee of co-sponsoring organizations, which she has chaired. She's also a governor of the United Nations System Staff College and a member of and an honorary advisor council of the Dark Fund for Journalists. Gloria Kanem, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Director of the UNFPA, one of the top UN leaders in New York, here for the special video keynote. Let's take a listen to this.
Ms. Tina M. Patterson, President of the PuLSE Institute, Mr. Bankole Thompson, Editor-in-Chief, members of the board and the National Advisory Panel, distinguished participants, partners, and friends. Imagine a girl. She is 12 years old. She loves school and dreams of finishing her studies, finding a decent job, and starting a family when she's ready. Only now, due to COVID, her hopes are evaporating. Her parents are now jobless due to the pandemic, and many nights she goes to bed hungry. Soon she'll drop out of school to get married and lessen the family's economic burden. With no contraception and with no say, early pregnancy and childbirth, predictably her fate. Standing at the threshold of puberty, why should she have to face a lifetime of poverty, powerlessness, and missed opportunities? I know this girl. I've met her in many places in distress situations all around the world, and I want her to have a fair chance in life. At UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, we believe that sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality are key levers to end poverty and pave the way for a world in which women and girls control their own destinies. That was exactly the consensus at the Cairo International Conference on Population and Development in 1994. That conference program of action is evergreen. It made clear that population is not an isolated variable for external manipulation. Population fundamentally is about people, and in particular, women's lives interconnected with their families, livelihoods, and the very environment in which we live. So now, some 25 plus years on, it's clear that that Cairo breakthrough on population and development has contributed to fewer people living in extreme poverty, fewer preventable deaths among women and children, greater access to primary education, and approximately 7 additional years of life expectancy at birth. And yet the stark reality is that we still have a long way to go towards a gender equal world in which every woman and every girl is able to fulfill her potential. Discriminatory laws, policies, and norms continue to challenge women and girls' bodily autonomy and limit their full access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Indeed, the latest UNFPA research shows that only 55% of women globally are able to make their own decisions regarding sexual relations and contraception. We know that the ability to control decisions about one's body, including the number and the spacing of children, is a precondition for the enjoyment of broader rights and empowerment. Bodily autonomy supports women's decision-making ability. It strengthens a woman's ability to participate meaningfully in the economy and increases the likelihood of breaking the cycle of poverty. A woman who can say, "My body is my own," takes her own decisions about sexual and reproductive health matters. She's also significantly less likely to experience intimate partner violence and much more likely to be able to identify how to prevent HIV and how to seek prenatal care. In the more than 150 locations where UNFPA operates, we're focused on achieving 3 zeros that make a difference to life chances. 0 unmet need for family planning, 0 preventable deaths during childbirth, and 0 gender-based violence and harmful practices, in which I will include child marriage and female genital mutilation as harmful violence against women and girls. And sadly, now COVID-19 is contributing to a surge in adolescent pregnancies. Early on, we warned that COVID would contribute to the spike in gender-based violence that we're seeing now, and other human rights violations that threaten to undo decades of progress for women and girls' health, education, and well-being. UNFPA now projects that this pandemic could lead to 15 million unintended pregnancies a year and 60 million more cases of gender-based violence. Women deserve better. Women demand better. Meanwhile, 2 million additional cases of female genital mutilation and 13 million child marriages are expected to occur by the year 2030, dimming the light and the potential of an entire generation. And even before the pandemic struck, the global lifetime cost in lost earnings from girls who do not complete their secondary education was estimated at up to $30 trillion. UNFPA's intervention to respond to COVID-19 focus on advocacy and programs for those most at risk. And as always in times of crisis, it is the poorest and the most vulnerable people, women and girls chief among them, who are the hardest hit. What COVID-19 has also done is to expose huge fault lines. Today, we're witnessing what years of structural inequality, racism, discrimination, and institutional neglect have wrought. Poor access to quality health care, chronic disease, economic hardship, unemployment, housing insecurity, and the list goes on. Everywhere around the globe, the pandemic is wreaking havoc in Black and brown communities, the culmination of years of discriminatory public policies, systemic racism, and marginalization. In the USA and Latin America, for example, it is afrodescendientes who are 3 times more vulnerable to contracting and dying from coronavirus and suffer from its economic impact. The intersection of gender and race compounds the challenges for women of African descent who experience disproportionately high levels of poverty and are overrepresented in the informal job market, too often without basic social protections, including quality health care. Black women are also more likely to be victims of gender-based violence and 3 times more likely to die from preventable causes during pregnancy and childbirth. So what changes this, dear friends? It's up to us to take action. Action to make vulnerabilities visible, and furthermore, a commitment not just to say, but to join hands and to do. For us at UNFPA, our actions occur in humanitarian camps, in villages and towns all around the developing countries. We show up for women and girls when they need us most. Staffing hotlines for a woman under COVID lockdown who needs to escape an abusive partner. For that expectant woman who urgently needs a midwife. And yes, for a 12-year-old girl who wants to avoid being married off and to pursue her education and fulfill her potential. I have to add that for actions to be grounded in solid data and to truly leave no one behind, data must be disaggregated. We have to ask the right questions in order to know. Data do help us to know what's going on, but we have to disaggregate by ethnicity, by race, by disability, of course, by age and gender, and other parameters of import. That's how governments and others can identify and reach those who are most in need, which is essential to ensure better decisions, better policies, and better interventions. As we respond to this pandemic, upholding the full rights of those who are greatest at risk of being left behind is mission critical. And I believe that it's only through dialogue with representatives of marginalized communities that we will find answers to address the complexities of the COVID-19 crisis. Grassroots organizations and activists are leading in advancing the rights of people in their communities and in raising the demand for services and systems to make sustainable change and to make meaningful change. As we grapple with the gendered dimensions of this pandemic, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling on the global community to put women and girls at the center of the response and recovery efforts for equal representation in all decision-making processes and positions. I am very proud to be part of the first gender equal team of leaders in United Nations history. Previous crises also show us that bringing women's voices to the table makes for a much more successful and inclusive response. And COVID has been no exception, with countries led by women outperforming others by a mile. Simply put, we need more women in leadership. As Maya Angelou said, each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women. While equal representation may elude us for now, the historic elections of US Vice President Kamala Harris and Costa Rica's Vice President Campbell provide inspiration to all women and girls, and especially women of color. Dear friends, protecting sexual and reproductive health and rights is part and parcel of advancing gender equality. That will be key to getting us through this pandemic and beyond to build a more resilient future. I recommend 3 key investments to give us unprecedented opportunity in terms of action. First, investing in system changes to enable women and girls to make informed choices and exercise their rights at home, at work, at school, and in the courts. Next, we need investments to address the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic on women and girls with targeted social assistance programs. And third, to ensure women's representation in pandemic planning and in all decision-making. Inherent in this is seeing sexual and reproductive health and rights needs prioritized, even amid overstretched health systems and shrinking budgets. Upholding the rights of women and girls is the right thing to do. The evidence shows it's also the smart thing to do because every $4.60 invested in an adolescent girl's health and upliftment, including her avoidance of early pregnancy, will give back at least 10 times as much in benefits to society. A fantastic investment under any terms. Dear friends and colleagues, even now with COVID, I remain optimistic about the future for the world's 12-year-old girls. I am inspired knowing that human rights and justice give us the tools we need to fight poverty and make right the long-standing inequalities that this pandemic has laid bare. Only then can we create the pathway to a more healthy, just, prosperous, and sustainable world for everyone. thank you, and I wish you a very successful forum.
All right. We are quite honored that Under Secretary General Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund, accepted our invitation to deliver this keynote. A beautiful speech, remark, given in the era of this pandemic, and knowing that anybody who bears the designation title of a United Nations Under Secretary General or United Nations Executive Director is one of the most busiest individuals in the world. Because their offices are presiding over billions, the affairs of billions of people around the world. And that's why we are very honored here at the PuLSE Institute that Dr. Kanem accepted our invitation and gave what I consider to be this depth of a keynote address. She went across the globe for us to give us almost a status report, if you will, and to encourage us to continue on this path. And we here at the PuLSE Institute will continue to engage the Office of the Undersecretary General, Dr. Cannon, on a number of other issues that we're not going to discuss now, but down the line, we think it is important for this organization, this anti-poverty think tank, headquartered in America's largest Black city, also headquartered in one of the largest poverty cities in the nation. It is important for an institute like this to be able to engage on this level, the office of the Undersecretary General of the United Nations in New York. And it's very important. Again, we thank Dr. Cannon for quite a historic keynote address she just gave here, beautifully presented. And it's just, I'm just thinking about Maya Angelou. I didn't even know she was going to weave Maya Angelou in that speech. I mean, what else? Once you mention Maya Angelou, it's over. That's it, right, Janice? That's all. That's it. That's it. It's just amazing. Maya Angelou said, "And still I rise." So it's a beautiful thing. Look, our next segment, the next 20 minutes, this is going to be quite a fascinating conversation. It is important. It is at the center of what we do. We're talking about women rising in leadership roles and being able to take the mantle of leadership and to fight. Tina Patterson occupies a unique space. She's one of the few, and I've done my research on this. She's one of the few Black women, few, and I can count on 1 to 5, few Black women to head a major think tank of this nature like the PuLSE Institute in the nation, one of the few Black women. In fact, when you look at the history of think tanks, it's normally the exclusive preserve of white men, powerful white men, powerful white men. And so Tina is one of the few Black women, few. I don't know if there are others like her, but as far as I know, she's one of the few to serve as president of a major think tank like the PuLSE Institute. And there's a lot in there in terms of what she's doing here in the anti-poverty fight. And we want her to share some of that in this conversation with Karen Weaver. She needs no introduction. Sister Karen Weaver needs no introduction. She's not a typical politician. She has a vocation. She's a trained clinical psychologist. Dr. Karen Weaver, a trained clinical psychologist. You know, a lot of our politicians, you're like, oh, so what did you do before? Oh, I've been running all my life. That's all I've done. Okay. But Karen Weaver is a trained clinical psychologist, became mayor of Flint at a time when the city just got to the international map for a lead water crisis, unforgivable lead water crisis. And she managed and presided during that period. And tough, a challenge is even perhaps, I don't know if that's the best word to describe it, but she presided over that. And Flint has, the city of Flint has all of the ingredients that were raised here in this conversation today. Poverty, you know, what role that women are playing, and to have a woman, a female mayor at a time of a crisis, an epidemiology crisis actually, that affects kids, children as, you know, young as 4 years old, exposed to lead drinking water. It's unconscionable. But she was not only the mayor, but she was also a woman who presided over that. So for the next 20 minutes, a conversation between Attorney Tina Patterson, the president of the PuLSE Institute, and Dr. Karen Weaver, the former mayor of Flint, Michigan. She's also my colleague on the 9:10 a.m. Superstation dial. We're on the daily dial. She hosts the daily show on 9:10 a.m. Superstation every day. She wakes us up from 7 to 9 a.m. every morning. And of course, I come hours later after her, 11 to 1. So we're on, we're on the airwaves here in Michigan. But Dr. Weaver, thank you so much. I know you have a very busy schedule. Mayor Weaver, thanks so much for being here. And I'm going to go straight to you, though, Mayor Weaver, in terms of just your take on the subject, because you've been listening to a multitude of speakers here. Bring it home for us in terms of the role that you played as a former mayor of Flint and the issues that were raised here this evening.
Okay, first, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Bankole, PuLSE. And this has been something. Before I jump in, this has been something. It's been enlightening, it's been informative. And these are the kind of conversations we need to have and we need to continue to have, because these are the kinds of conversations that I know give me the strength and the energy and to continue on, because you get tired. You do get tired, but these are the things that energize us. And so I'm just really happy to be here. But it was interesting because I was listening, and one of the questions people always asked me was, what was it like to be the first woman mayor in this kind of situation? And I told them, I said, I didn't think about that. And they asked me that when I was running, and I said, I didn't think about it then, because if I didn't get there, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And I really didn't think about it. When it first hit me, I think I was it was during Black History Month, and I went into a school gymnasium and they had a living museum, and a little girl was me for Black History Month. And I thought, oh my goodness. And it went back to some of the things that I've heard the other women talking about, is you don't know who's watching you. You just don't know who you're standing up for and who you're being a voice for and who you are inspiring. And that's what made it worth it. That's what makes it worth it when you're doing those hard and those challenging things. But I think the other thing that I heard that is very important is, when I got in office, I had no power. I came in with no power, and people said to me, how can you do anything? What can you do any differently? And I said, I have my voice. I have my voice, and my voice is my power, and it's something that no one's going to take from me. And I'm going to use it and give you information, whether it's good information. Well, let me say it this way, not bad information, but if it was something we wanted to hear or didn't want to hear, because we deserve to know the truth. And so that's one of the things that I want everyone to know, but especially women, because sometimes, they try to disregard our voice and weaken our voice and just shut it out. And that was what I said, is I'm going to use my voice. My voice is my power. It's our power. And it's something that no one can take. And that's one of the things we can't let anybody take, is our power, because that's where it is. And that was something that I knew that I had to do, that I had to talk. And I just, I wasn't going to shut up. And I hope, even though I'm not in the role of mayor, that I'm showing people that you don't have to be in that role to make a difference. We can all make a difference wherever we are. And I know some people thought, oh, she's not in that role, we can shut her down. I'm like, no, you can't. What's so interesting to me is I can talk even more. I can use my voice and my power really even more, because sometimes you have to walk that fine line when you're doing things. I said, whoo, watch out now. Watch out now.
So let me ask you, before I go to Tina, though, it's interesting the way you came at the question, and that is using your voice. Mm-hmm. And Shirley Chisholm reminded us in her biography. She said in Congress, those men were so scared of her voice. They were scared of her mouth. She had no gun. She had no deeper wallet. But she said her mouth and her voice, they were scared of it, and so they were very mindful of that, because they knew that when she speaks, it was infectious, if you will. It was contagious, so it went across the spectrum. Talk about why that was important, why you felt it was important to use your voice when you presided over one of the most egregious. You came, let me not use the word preside. You became mayor at a time when the city was dealing with one of the most egregious human rights crises in America. the poisoning of an entire city, including children as young as 4 years old. I remember visiting New Orleans, and I walked into a restaurant, and the first question, when they found out I was from Michigan, from this area, the first question that came from this white woman's mouth was, Flint, Michigan, how is Flint? So talk about the why you felt it was necessary and important to use your voice, even though when you took over, the city was still dealing with, you know, it was the emergency management situation was an ebb and flow kind of thing.
Well, you just said why. Because you know what, not only had our democracy been taken, but our voice had been taken in the city of Flint. And you saw that happen in Detroit, you saw it happen in Benton Harbor, you saw it happen in Pontiac, you saw it happen in Flint, when an emergency manager came to and took these urban communities over and took our voice, because the voice, the people elect you to be their voice, and they shut us down, and they covered this story up. We couldn't get our voice out. You know, how for 18 months can you not know that the water in Flint has been poisoned? And we have a public health crisis going on in this city. How do you not know that? You didn't know it because our voices had been taken. Everything had been shut down, and we had a dictatorship going on in the city of Flint. And that was all that I had. I had my voice, and I vowed that I wasn't going to let anybody take that from me. And that was how I was going to get information out. In fact, it was really pretty funny. I remember there were times when the governor would say, please don't go on TV and say this, because one of the things I said was, I may not have any power, but, and when they said, what can you do differently? And I said, I can use my voice. I said, I can let you know what's going on. I can tell you what they're doing. I can tell you what I think should be done. And I'm going to be in front of the media every chance I get to tell this story and to lift not just my voice, but Flint's voice about what is happening, because this shouldn't have been going on. This shouldn't have been going on for as long as it went on, and people should have known. And it was such a huge cover up, and there was such silencing going on in the city of Flint that was all that I had, was my voice, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you, former Mayor of Flint, Karen Weaver here, conversation with Attorney Tina Patterson. We want to let you know also, we do have students from various Detroit public schools, high school students we invited to participate here. In fact, Detroit International Academy for Young Women and its students said to us just now on Zoom, we're very appreciative for this amazing opportunity. Lots of knowledge we're excited to share with the female scholars at the Detroit International Academy for Young Women. Tina, let me go to you, Attorney Patterson. From where Mayor Weaver talked about in terms of using her voice here, the role that you play here for the PuLSE Institute as the president of the Institute is also a voice. Talk about that, though, in terms of how, how you see the need for increased women leadership in ensuring that, in fact, women remain as powerful voices in the way that Mayor Weaver explained.
Well, because often we have so much to say. I think that as women, we are always expected to be caretakers. We're always expected to care for the family, the children, the sick, the elderly among us. And even in my younger life as a woman, I thought that was diminishing almost, because it's like, well, that's all you expect me to do. But now as an older woman, an older adult now, I can see that that is a very cherished role in our society. And for it to fall upon women, it's something we should embrace, but not just in a domestic capacity, also in a professional capacity, because we can bring a lot of care in that role as well. So similar to Dr. Weaver, as the former mayor of Flint, she cared for her people. And not just as a mother or a wife or a grandmother or an aunt, but as a sitting mayor, as an elected official. And for me, as the president of a think tank of this magnitude that is exclusively focused on anti-poverty, on anti-racist policies and more equitable policies, it's up to me to give that voice and that same care to people who I see in Detroit, or in other similarly situated situations, who are going through these really terrible quality of life issues, such as water being cut off, which we have here in Detroit, such as overtaxation of property, which we have here in Detroit, which caused people to lose their home. So now that they're homeless or they can't afford to be where they were. I mean, all of these things come from a level of care and understanding that women almost not naturally or exclusively possess, but are expected to have. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing because you take care of people. But I think that as women and as empowered women in leadership, we take that kind of acceptance, if you will, or expectance and magnify it, bring it to our professional capacity. So bring it to our roles as doctors, our roles as lawyers, which we both are. Dr. Weaver, I'm an attorney. Bring it to that level of the profession that is not necessarily seen by men in the same way. Bring it to that elected official role, bring it to that president of this institute role, bring it to this, other higher elected role. Bring that expectancy of nurturing and caretaking to what we want to see out of our society and to the policies that we want to create in our society. Yes, money is important. We can also go into money and budgeting and things of that nature, but that's always going to be there, right? That's expected of higher level positions to understand that kind of sophistication. But in essence, to bring our spirit of humanity, our voices, our care, that has to be what leads our work. It doesn't matter what role we're going to occupy if we're not coming in with a basic care, necessity, and understanding for humanity.
Yeah, no question. Then the larger issue becomes, though, when you're in the space that you play, the space that you're in, as a former mayor and someone who remains an advocate, and you have that bully pulpit, Mayor Weaver, Tina, from where you sit as president of an important anti-poverty think tank. How do you navigate the challenges that may come at you, where there are folks who would want to think that it's important to place emphasis or importance on a male being named a president of a think tank, a male serving as mayor, as opposed to a woman who served as mayor, and as opposed to a woman who is head of a think tank? You have those those reactions, if you will, and sometimes even in professional capacity, because there's a doubt that permeates, and it's a doubt of resistance to gender equity, a resistance to women leadership that rises to fight poverty. How do you challenge, or how do you deal with those kinds of challenges?
That's a really good question, because we face them all the time. You face them all the time, and you get up and you just continue to keep moving. I mean, there were many times, you're so disrespected as a female in these roles. I remember, being called a little girl, and we're going to treat you like the little girl you are. Those kinds of things happen, told that I should not be there. This was where a male should be, and underestimated. And you know what, that underestimation, that worked to my advantage. I said, you just keep underestimating me, because I'm going to show you what I can do. And it was, you almost, there were times that I thought about it, but there was so much, it was funny for me because there was so much happening in Flint. I mean, as soon as I get there, we're under a national spotlight because this emergency has been declared. There are a lot of times I grew an extra layer of skin. You have to have tough skin as a woman to go into these places and not be scared to go into these places and make people uncomfortable because they don't want you there. They want to bully and intimidate you. And I just wasn't going to let that happen. And that was something that people needed to see. They needed to see that that was not going to happen. We had a crisis going on. I mean, we had a public health crisis going on in the city of Flint. And I didn't, it's really almost, I haven't had time to even process some of that until I got out of that role, because if I stopped to think about that all the time, I wasn't going to be as effective as I needed to be. I wasn't going to get done what needed to be done. And I really had to stay focused on, why am I here? What am I doing? And how am I going to get through this? And that was what I did. I don't know if that was the best way to do it or not, but that was how I had to maneuver through those kinds of situations was, what am I here for? And just stay really laser focused, because, all eyes were on Flint. I mean, it was tough being, just being under that kind of microscope. So my thing was, what am I working for? What am I trying to do? And what is the best way? I can't say, well, it wasn't an easy way, but what is going to be my path to make these things happen? And that was what I did. That was just what I did in that time.
All right. Tina, how do you navigate or deal with the challenges that may come at you or that come at you?
First, recognize that they're going to be there, and not by my own doing. I don't internalize that kind of systemic oppression. I don't. I know I'm a woman. I know I'm a Black woman. I know that there are going to be things that are directed my way that are not directed to my white male colleagues or white women colleagues, for that matter. But it's not my fault, and it's not because of some deficiency in me. It's just how this society has operated. So I don't internalize that, and I stay mission driven and with conviction. A lot like Mayor Weaver was indicating, you have to know what your purpose is, you have to know what you care about most, and you have to be committed to seeing it through. That's what really drives me in my work every day. And I think also being empowered and inspired by not just other women, but men as well. A big figure for me was my father, who empowered me and never put any parameters on me for being a woman or an expectation of what I should or should not do. And where did he get that from? He got it from his mother. So I think that the sexes have a lot to learn from each other and empower each other. And especially when a man empowers a woman in that way, there's so much that can be done, because men have that inherent power from society. So if they pass it off to a woman, she's not going to think otherwise than to do what that man would do, right? So I think that that's what really drives me, just being secure in who I am, knowing that there is no deficiency in me for being a woman, but that these are the challenges women will expect, but not to take the disrespect either. I don't know that I've had to, we've all had to check male colleagues or to really assert ourselves and who we are. There are so many times just in my role as an attorney, I have to say, yes, I am the attorney, because they don't expect that of me. Just looking at me and seeing a Black woman, there's often been so many times I'm the only Black woman in the courtroom or in this particular space. And you never get used to it, but you always recognize it. And you always be sure that you get done what you were there to do. That's what the focus is. That's what the job is about. And often it's for the right reasons. It's not to necessarily climb the ladder for me professionally or personally, but to get my message out, right? To defend a client, to give voice to the people in Detroit who are not having their voices heard at City Hall, or to the school children who aren't having their voices heard in the state of Michigan or in the nation, or just the entire purpose of this whole forum, to elevate the voices of girls who are not having their voices heard, to be that woman that will do it. So that is what I'm always focused on, just knowing what the limitations, the expected limitations, but fighting through them anyway, because the larger goal I have in mind is greater than that.
All right. And I want to say we got Southeastern High School scholars in the house. Thank you all for being here. But one of the things that I want to say, Mayor Weaver, is that I'm glad that I'm not the only male here, and I'm glad that we have men participating here, because normally when you have these kinds of conferences, forums, you don't have too many men who participate. It's almost like a secret society forum, if you will. And I do respect that there are times when the sexes have to be in a room and iron out and talk about some issues. But I'm glad that in this a forum like this, I'm participating here. Dr. Arun Gandhi shared this beautiful story about India. This is the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. It doesn't go bigger than that. Shares a beautiful story. Pascal is our board chair, and I see Brother Chief William Riley, the police chief of Inkster. He's been on from, he's right here with us. So at least I'm not the only man, because I know Dr. Gandhi had to get off and get on another Zoom forum. But it's important though, because like you all said, I think we need to hear this, and to be able to take that message, and that women need strong allies you know, in men.
Mhm.
They don't need makeshift allies. They don't need allies who will say, well, okay, Mayor Weaver, I'll support you, you know, when you get in the Oscar awards, when you get the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but when you're down in the woods and you're fighting, they're nowhere to be seen. Women need strong allies. Talk about that though, Mayor Weaver, in the context of that, and I'll let Tina also weigh in on that.
You know, and I was really listening to what Tina was saying as well, and it's who you surround yourself with. And I, you know, I didn't get where I am without strong men in my life and men that supported me. That's what made me who I am. You know, was my father, my grandfathers. So it was so funny because I remember some people said, "Oh, she's just going to have all these women in City Hall." I said, "I'm going to have men too." You know, and I had men as part of my team, and the things that happened because it was a good team, and it was a good team of strong men and strong women working together to make these things happen. And one of the things I always said is, we may do some things differently, but it doesn't mean that we're doing something that's not wrong because we're doing it differently. And so we learn to accept those differences and say, where is it we're trying to go? Because we're trying to get to the same place. And it was very nice to have, I need to hear this male perspective. You need to hear this female perspective, and how do we mesh these things and keep moving forward? And that's really what it's about. We can't do this by ourselves, and we shouldn't do it by ourselves. And that's what we have to come to. We're in this together. You know, we're in this struggle together. And I don't want to do things without men, and I wouldn't want men to not want us at the table. And when we can all be at the table together and pressing that issue forward and making a difference, that's when we're going to see the changes that we need to see. It's us coming together. I'm glad we're here, and it's Women's History Month, and we're lifting women because women need to be lifted, because we are disrespected. We do have a hard, road to travel. But you know what? When we have a strong man helping us get there, whether it's a co-worker, a family person, it's going to be better for us all. And so, and that's what I know. That's what I believe. And I was just listening when Tina was talking about her dad, and that was what was instilled. And that's important to me. And it was important to me that, I didn't want to just show women. I didn't want to just be a role model for women. I think that it's good for young men and older men to see a strong woman and to see a woman doing things and being positive and powerful and impactful. That's important for all of us to have both of those kinds of role models and not to diminish one over the other.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree wholeheartedly. Just look at the global compass of who we are, half men and half women, right? So we're not going to be doing anything one-sided either way or the other. The problem is that for so long we have had male-dominated ideals that have excluded women. That's been the problem. So it's never been men are the problem holistically. It's just been this notion of gender roles, right? And that men are supposed to have the answers and women take a backseat. That's the problem that we need to fix by challenging that, just being who we are as women, being leaders, and bringing other women leaders to the table. So it's about gender equity, right? And we don't have that right now because it's in disrepair because we've had these male-dominated ideals for so long. So it's not like we're trying to shift it from 90% male-dominated to 90% female-dominated. We're trying to really parry it out. So if half of the world's population is men and half is women, then half of women should be shown in the policies that we have, and that's not true. Particularly in this country, we've never had a female president. The one we could have elected 4 years ago was not. We're just now getting our first female vice president, but we still have half the population of the country. So those are the things that we need to talk about when we're talking about gender equity. We're not saying down with the patriarchy as a whole because they're men. We're just saying down with this notion that as women we can't lead ourselves and we can't be leaders because of our sex, period. So it's not about trying to flip the script on what it is now, but just to be included because we need to be, quite honestly, and we've been excluded for too long.
Tina, you said something that reminded me of something something someone said to me. They came, they were meeting with my executive team, and they said, when the meeting was over, they said, "You have a lot of women in here." And I looked and I thought, I counted and I said, well, it was even, I mean, it was 50-50. And I'm thinking, well, we're half the population. Why shouldn't, I mean, but that was what struck them, was there's a lot of women in here. And I thought, really? I mean, let's say it's 5 and 5 or 6 and 6.
It's been so unequal for so long that when you start to bring equality in, it looks like it's, you know, oppression or something, or that it's just normal. But that's not what it is. That's not what it should be. It's just common sense when you think about it.
It was common sense and qualified people.
Exactly.
I almost wanted to bring Janice Cannon in this conversation, but we're almost out of time, because this was, we could continue, this could have been the entire forum, but I'm glad that's why we reserved it for the last, because I knew what the direction this was going to go. Chief Riley, William Riley, the police chief of Inkster, I see him there smiling. He's taking down notes. So I'm sure, Chief, maybe you may do some culture change. I'm not prejudging you. You may do some culture change at that police department. But I want to take the opportunity, though, to thank all of you for really being here and participating in this foundation, what we call a foundational investment in recognition of Women's History Month. A lot of women we could lift up. And I think this conversation was important, necessary. And I'm glad that Tina saw it fit to ensure that we have enough male participation in this. Because one of the things that she told me is that I don't want this to be a patronage kind of thing. Men got to participate. And I think it really drove it home listening to Dr. Arun Gandhi just share that beautiful story out of India. You know, when, you know, it's just there's so much in there, so much wisdom, so much story. And the stories that Janice Khan has shared, what Sister Simone Campbell shared, Paske, our board chair, and the stories what Cindy Paske shared here tonight. It's you know, it's, you don't find too many CEOs speak like that. I think y'all know that. You don't find too many. You gotta, it's like we need a microscope or something. You know, we need a scientist to be, you know, we need to look like we need a double microscope to find out, can we see them? You know, so I think all in all, tonight's event was quite remarkable, and most importantly to our keynote speaker, Dr. Natalia Kanem, who was honored to be a keynote speaker. But with this COVID UN thing happening, these folks are, I mean, and, you know, we are avoiding airplanes. They're flying all over the world because they're presiding over billions of people around the world. That's what the United Nations does. So we definitely understood, but she still, despite a commanding business schedule, she kept her commitment and said, I want to deliver this keynote via video from the UN headquarters. And so we are honored that she did that. And we'll continue to engage the Office of the UN Under Secretary General on the issues that the PuLSE is working here. And I also want to thank all our National Advisory Panel members. They've been with us from day one. Janice Khan, Simone Campbell, Sister Simone Campbell, Dr. Arun Gandhi. These folks, they came when the PuLSE was founded. They came right on board, right on board. They didn't say, well, write us 10,000 letters and tell us, you know, what this is. They didn't say, well, go through 1 million secretaries and I'll see what, I'll get back with me 10 years later. They readily came on board, lend their credibility and everything that they've done. And so we're honored to have them on the National Advisory Panel. And most importantly, we're honored to have all of you on board who are supporting the work of the PuLSE Institute. So this officially brings us to an end. We have some important announcements coming up. In fact, we launched the Reverend Solomon Kenlock lecture series, named after one of the most important Black ministers in this town, has the largest Black church, a progressive minister. We've launched a lecture series after his name called the Solomon Kenlock lecture series on church policy and social transformation. We're going to be doing rolling out that series in April. Actually, I'll just make the announcement here. April 5th, the day after Dr. King's anniversary death, is when we'll do the launching of the Solomon Kenlock lecture series in church transformation and social policy, looking at the role of the Black church in addressing the question of poverty. And we've confirmed the one and only Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes, one of the most important African-American ministers in the nation, will be the keynote speaker for that event, April 5th, the day after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination anniversary commemoration. Is also the day after Easter. So you will be getting emails from us to participate, be a part of that event. It's going to be quite an event in the city of Detroit. when we launch that series to look at the Black church and poverty. But for now, thank you all for being here. And it's an honor to have you all to participate. And Tina, final comments as we round up.
Yes, thank you, Bankole, for your capable words and your always amazing moderating skills. You know how to bring and weave everything together so beautifully. We appreciate you here. To all of our speakers, again, thank you for your time. You did not have to do this, but you chose to do this because it was important to you and it was important to the larger global conversation. Thank you. And to all of our participants, you know, you really make our work worthwhile. So I really want to thank you as well for taking the time out of your evening to not just enjoy this conversation, but to listen and learn. I appreciate it. All of the comments that have come in so far have been amazing. And we're so happy to be able to bring you something of this quality, of this caliber, and of this importance to your lives and to the world. And I just urge everyone to keep this memory in the back of your mind when you go forward with the work, because it does get tiring, it does get exhausting, but we know it's important and we can't quit. It's just too important to abandon. So I want to thank you all so much again. Appreciate you so much. Thank you to our staff who is very beautifully weaving us in and out of this conversation all evening. We appreciate your work as well.
Iron Ruts, yes.
Yes. And thank you all so much for being here again.
All right. Thank you all.